In this series, I set out on a journey to understand some of the great landscapes of Britain, to piece together the history that shaped them over thousands of years. At one time, Britain was almost covered in woodland, but now no two counties are the same. My aim was to discover why that is. This is the Weald. What makes this particularly intriguing is that it's one landscape that's kept many of its trees. There are lonely farms and little paddocks, oast houses and hop gardens, and they're all clues to its past. But what explains the trees? I'm looking down over this great saucer of woodland, balanced between Kent and Sussex, and surrounded by the rim of the Downs. The Weald is one of the great wooded areas of Britain. It compares with the great forests of the past, the Forest of Bere, the New Forest, the Caledonian Forest, but the Weald's different. It's kept most of its trees. It's a landscape of scattered farms with small fields, but above all, it's a huge landscape of trees. And the first thing I want is to discover why that is. Archaeologists have discovered that most of Britain's forests were felled by the first farmers, right back in the Bronze Age, 4,000 years ago. Was it possible the Wealden forest somehow escaped this massive original clearance? Tristan Bareham has been collecting Bronze Age finds from the Weald, mostly tools. He's made replicas to find out how they were used. My first clues to what the Weald's Bronze Age people were doing. That's coming pretty quickly. I mean, could they have felled really big trees this way?
Probably going to get 2 or 3 people and take a time over it, but there's no limitation in the size that they were able to fell.
Beautiful edge on it.
It's a very good edge that's been work hardened, so we've hammered that with a bronze hammer, put it in a fire to anneal it to soften the metal again, then re-hammered it, and by a sequence of that you can compress the metal and make it extremely hard and get a very nice sharp edge on it.
Can I have a go with this?
Please do, please do.
Bronze Age axing.
Lovely, very effective.
So once people had these tools, the tree felling went on apace.
One axe like this might have cleared many hundreds of trees. And they're felling trees, they're clearing the trees, they're altering the landscape.
Tristan was confident that the Weald didn't escape the Bronze Age axe. On my first day, I was faced with the astonishing thought that the Weald was once cleared of trees, like every other part of England. By 500 BC, as the Bronze Age gave way to the Iron Age, there were probably fields here, just like anywhere else. But here the trees came back. Was that in Iron Age times or Roman times? What was different about the Weald that people allowed the trees to come back? The next morning, I was determined to find out what happened to the Weald in the Iron Age and under the Romans. Did they simply go on farming, or did they, for some reason, let the forests return? I called Martin Brown, an archaeologist from Lewes, and we arranged to meet in a wood near Tunbridge Wells. What was going on here 2,000 years ago? The clues, he said, are right beneath your feet.
It's really horrible land to farm.
And what would they have been doing with it in prehistoric times?
You tell me. It's so inhospitable. Even today, it's difficult for a farmer to make any sort of living off it.
Yeah.
I mean, we know there's evidence of clearance. There are burial mounds There are these lanes, like we're walking up, these trackways that run across.
This is an ancient path.
Yeah, I mean, we've got no idea how old is ancient, but it's been here for a long, long time.
Yeah. This Weald and clay was terrible for farming. And we were following no ordinary farm track. It was climbing towards one of the highest points in the Weald. Where was it leading? What secret purpose lay hidden in its origin, perhaps 2,500 years ago? And what's this? This looks artificial.
Yep, this is the Saxonbury Iron Age hill fort. We've got this outer bank, runs around there. There's a ditch, there's a step down into it, runs all the way around encircling the hilltop, and inside it there's this very obvious earth bank, this rampart, which I guess sometime before the Roman invasion, when it was being lived in, had a palisade fence on top.
What was it for?
There's a number of these forts that sit right on this highest point of the High Weald. A chain of these forts, all from the very late Iron Age, and they sit right on this network of trackways as well. So maybe, as well as being a nice defended place where people are living, it's about controlling the landscape and controlling the resources around us as well.
Resources? What were they trying to control with this network of tracks and forts? Can one see them on the map today?
Yeah, there's 4 forts right across this top of the High Weald here. There's a couple of hill forts here below where Tunbridge Wells is today, High Rocks, Saxonbury. There's Garden Hill over on the Ashdown Forest, and then there's another fort over in this chain up here just into West Sussex. And that's interesting because they sit very, very close to these north-south roads, including a lost Roman road coming through here, and these ridge roads running east-west. So it quarters up this piece of land.
Before nightfall, we drove to Holtai in search of one of these key roads and hard evidence of what resources the Iron Age and Roman settlers were after.
Those Roman roads we were talking about, well, there's one of them down here. This one was abandoned, and it still survives as a bit of a trackway at the bottom. And it was partly excavated a few years ago.
Right.
And then look, that opens right out as it gets the width of the Roman road as it's running through. Just down here, there's a bit of the surface. Exposed piece of Roman road surface, even supposedly with wheel ruts still in it.
Feels like concrete.
Oh, it's amazing. It's hard, compacted. Well, I'll show you what it is. These bits here.
Yeah.
You look at that, you see how it's all rust coloured?
Bit rusty, yeah.
In fact, if we run our compass over it, you might just see a bit of movement.
Oh, it's flicking. It's small, but it's there.
There's just a faint movement across.
Is there iron in it?
There's iron in here. This is iron slag. You know, we were up at Saxonbury, and I was talking about how the hill forts and the roads are controlling resources. I think it's iron, because we've got iron deposits beneath our feet here.
There was iron ore in the Weald and clay. I found a blacksmith, Shelley Thomas, and an expert in the ancient iron industry, Lynn Keyes. I was hoping there might be some secret in the ancient process of making iron that would explain the mysterious return of the Wealden woods. This is all the ingredients we need to make iron.
This is ore that has been already heated to take away oxygen and some other impurities.
Effectively iron oxide, that's it?
Yes.
And this stuff is what?
That's charcoal. Wood that has been very slowly heated and turned to a carbon.
So that's a product from the woodlands?
Yes.
So we've got iron oxide and carbon, and we're going to burn them together. How would the Romans have done it?
Well, they appear to have had a furnace which was an enclosed structure made of clay. They needed an atmosphere with very little oxygen. And the charcoal would have helped them in that it produces carbon monoxide, which would have taken the oxygen out of the iron.
Going.
It's going.
Yeah. Quite a sticky lump, quite quickly.
Really molten iron. Have we any idea how much iron the Romans were producing?
The Romans, in a furnace in the Weald, could produce anything up to 30 kilograms of iron in a day. Multiply that by 67 sites for the Roman period.
We must be talking of hundreds of
Yes,
tons
we
in
are.
a year. Yeah.
Yes.
And you multiply that up, it's a colossal amount of wood. That evening I worked it out. Every year the Romans must have needed 9,000 tons of wood to make their iron. Think it's cooked?
My goodness, yes. It's very fine.
Oh yes.
A lot of iron in that.
A lot of iron, yes. Yeah, there it is. Yes.
It's extremely magnetic.
So surely the Weald and woodlands were replanted to fuel the iron industry 2,000 years ago. That was my theory. But could I prove it? Next day I asked Rob Scaife. He's a paleobotanist and a specialist in ancient soils. We went to take samples near Midhurst. From the layers of peat, Rob will be able to tell what was growing in the Roman period and compare it with earlier times when the first settlers arrived, and right back into prehistory.
Ah, there we are. Now that's a very nice core.
Beautiful.
What we have here is very dark peat, quite compacted with pieces of wood in it. This is probably quite a stable environment with the older woodland, but you can see here this inwash, that silt inwash, that is almost certainly first evidence of prehistoric activity, woodland clearance and soil erosion from the valley sides coming in at this horizon.
3,000 years ago.
3,000
roughly at this point.
Approximately, yes. The peat above it, you can see it's not quite so compacted and dense as the material below. With fewer trees, they're not taking up so much water from the valley sides, and the water table locally was probably higher. Maybe the peat accumulated more rapidly.
The different textures in the upper and lower parts of the core told Rob that there was, after all, no replanting of trees to fuel the ancient iron industry. It was hard to believe, so we went back to his lab for more detail. Amazingly, grains of pollen and organic material survive in the peat. You can count them and get a good idea of how many of each species of tree was growing as the peat was laid down. The cores were only reliable up to the time of the Romans, but up till then the story was consistent. Once the trees were felled in the Bronze Age, they didn't return.
I really see very little evidence of changes really associated with the Iron Age or Roman time periods. It's most likely that the oak woodland was growing sporadically around or in valley bottoms.
In the valley bottoms, yes, maybe.
Which areas
Yes.
which weren't cultivated.
What's your guess about what happened after the Romans in the Weald?
It's conjectural, but if I had to guess, I would say that the forest which is attributed to the Weald, the wildwoods, probably dates back to the Saxon period. My guess is that if this wildwood did exist, that's when it regenerated.
Regenerated in the Saxon period. So much for my theory. The ancient ironmakers never seem to have replanted the forests at all. They must have got all their timber from hedgerows and copses in the wet valley bottoms. Instead, Rob was suggesting that the great Wealden woods must simply have regrown. Perhaps during some Dark Age confusion after the Romans left and while the Anglo-Saxons established themselves.